In this video, we're debunking 7 common myths that stop beginner and intermediate players from progressing. We'll start with the first and the most ridiculous of the myths, and that is that you have to be born with talent to play the guitar. This one is ridiculous. I can personally testify that, not only have I taught a ton of people to play guitar who aren't naturally talented, I myself am not naturally talented. I'm not even really like a naturally creative person. I'm an accountant by day, and my channel is kind of for people who want like a type A sort of in order approach to learning guitar. So this is silly. The only thing you can be born with that'll actually help you learn guitar is a passion for the instrument. If you're more interested in playing guitar, you'll be more inclined to practice, and then you'll probably get better faster. That might be what people are mistaking for natural talent. I'm the creative equivalent of a caveman, and I've somehow managed to get 100,000 subscribers. Is it super relevant? Maybe not, but I have my plaque now, and I'm going to be bragging about it every chance I get. By the way, thank you all for 100K. Moving on to myth number 2, you can't learn on an electric guitar. This comes from like an old school of guitar teaching that says you have to learn on an acoustic guitar first before you can move to electric, because acoustic is harder. It is true that acoustic guitars have more string tension, and so doing really intricate moves and playing scales and that kind of thing can be a little bit more difficult, but it's not true that acoustic is just absolutely harder. Acoustic and electric are the same thing. To practice one is basically to practice the other. This video is mostly me just talking to you guys, so I'm using an acoustic guitar as a prop, but I could just as easily use one of my electric guitars as a prop. In fact, in my videos, I often try to switch up, sometimes even within the same video, whether or not I'm using an acoustic or an electric guitar, just to drive home this point, just to drive home that when we're talking about guitar fundamentals, really learning the instrument, it really does not matter what you're learning on. If you're mostly interested in being an electric player, start there, and if you're mostly interested in being an acoustic player, start there. Moving on to myth 3. Myth 3 is that you have to be an absolute master of the instrument, and that you have to have completed learning guitar before you can jam with other people. This is totally not true. So the question is, how good do you have to be before you can jam with other people? And, the answer is that, technically, you can jam anytime, especially if you have a player who's at your same skill level. But I know what you guys mean when you're asking this, and luckily, there's a very specific answer. I think if you really want to jam with people, and you want to be prepared for most musical situations, you need to know the following things. Number 1 are the 7 essential open chords. That is E minor, E major, A minor, A major, G, C, and D. I have a whole video on these 7 chords, and if you want to check that out, it'll be linked in the description. The next thing you want to know is the minor pentatonic scale. I'll play a G minor pentatonic scale right here. That scale shape is movable, so you can play in a bunch of different keys. I'll have a deep dive video on that linked. Again, I just want this video to be debunking 7 myths, not a lesson video on these concepts. And the final thing you want to learn before you really jam with other people, I think, are the 4 essential bar chord shapes. That is an E string root major chord, an E string root minor chord, an A string root major chord, and an A string root minor chord. Again, my bar chord video will be linked. I know we went over that stuff really quickly. Again, check out the deep dive videos. But the point I'm trying to make is those are the 3 sets of skills that I think are really essential when you're trying to jam with other people. The point being, you don't have to have mastered a million exotic modes before you just go have a blues jam with somebody. You can get off the ground and get going pretty quickly with just that stuff. All right, myth number 4 is that music theory is hard, and some of you even try to justify this by saying stuff like, the Beatles didn't know music theory. First of all, music theory is not hard. Anybody who's trying to make it hard is just trying to make guitar more academically impressive than it really is. And as far as the whole Beatles didn't know music theory thing, number 1, even if that were true, you're not the Beatles. And number 2, it's not even true. The Beatles might not have known that this is officially called a C major 7 chord. They might have called it a purple chord or something. I don't know what they called it, but all music theory is a language that allows musicians to talk to each other about music. And I know for a fact the Beatles talked about music when they were writing songs. So the point is, they definitely used music theory. They just might not have known the proper names for stuff. But either way, you should learn music theory because music theory makes playing guitar easier. Myth number 5 is that online tutorials aren't as good as in-person lessons. And this isn't true. I think of online videos and in-person lessons as being two different use cases. Now, I'm about to make a controversial point. I always get some pushback when I say this, but I think it's true. I think that for very self-motivated players, when you're first starting out, you really don't need in-person lessons. For me, I wouldn't want to pay somebody to teach me like how to hold the pick and the names of the strings. I wouldn't want to pay somebody to teach me that stuff when the information is so readily available online. It's really kind of at the late beginner, early intermediate stage where the learning progression becomes a little less clear that I think an instructor can really help most players. Now, of course, that's not true if the primary benefit of getting an instructor is accountability and feedback, and that's totally legitimate. I'm not hating on that at all. I just think that knowing what kind of learner you are is kind of the determining factor in whether or not, online videos or in-person lessons is going to be the way to go for you. But the myth here is that, across the board, 100% of the time, in-person lessons are better, and the only reason you wouldn't do that is because you don't have, the time or the money or something like that. I don't think that's true. Speaking of instructors and the academic side of learning guitar, let's talk about myth number 6, and that is that you are going to have to learn to read music. Now, it is true that there are certain kinds of players that need to learn how to read music. If you want to play classical guitar, or if you want to go to like jazz school or something, then yeah, learning how to read music is going to be essential. But for most players, I'm going to say the vast majority of players who are just interested in playing like, contemporary kinds of music, blues, rock, metal, pop, country, these kinds of music, personally, I've played paid gigs for years and I've never had to read music. Now, admittedly, I'm not like the world's greatest guitarist or anything. I've never done like professional like session recording or that kind of work. Maybe reading music is helpful in those cases, but I haven't heard of that. And, I can read music. I'm actually a classical violinist, and I've just never read music for guitar. That's never been a useful skill in my, efforts toward guitar. If you just want to learn to read music, that's great, but I don't want to see people, use practice time that could be better spent on something else if you're really not going for a style that requires, music reading. The final myth is a pretty specific one. This is a conception that people have that the reason you should learn all the notes on the fretboard is because if you know all those notes, you'll be able to play guitar in the same way that if you know all the keys on a keyboard, you can type. They think if you learn all the notes, you can basically like type on the guitar. I want to be clear that there are a lot of great reasons to learn all the notes on the fretboard, but the ability to like type music isn't one of them. Learning guitar is more about shapes and understanding how shapes move in relation to each other, more than it is like coming up with a scale from scratch. Let me give you an example of what I mean by this. The music as typing crowd thinks that, okay, if I know all the notes of a C major scale, I know it'll be C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So if I just locate those notes, I might realize that like right here, I can play a C major scale. This might make intuitive sense, but in the real world, I'm not thinking about those notes when I'm playing the scale. I'm just taking my major scale shape that I know and just applying it where I know a C is. So in the same way that I'm not thinking about like the notes of a G major scale, I just have this scale shape, and if I start on a G, it'll end up being a G major scale. I don't want you guys thinking that you need to build scales and chords from scratch just by knowing the notes every single time you want to play a lead part or play a rhythm part or something like that. And again, there's a lot of great reasons to learn notes, all right? It helps with chord theory, it helps anchor the positions of these shapes that you can move around, but typing on guitar isn't one of them. I see a lot of guitar players kind of wasting time thinking that the way that they're going to learn to play guitar is by, building all of music theory from scratch just by knowing notes. And of course, I don't want you guys to waste time. So there's 7 guitar learning myths that have been thoroughly debunked. Good luck in your guitar learning pursuits, and check out the videos that I referenced in this video. Those are kind of good spots to start your learning progression if you're an absolute beginner. And as always, thank you for watching.